Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. My guest today is Glenn Whitman. Glenn is a history teacher and Dreyfus Family Director of the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning, CTTL, at St. Andrew's Episcopal School. He has shared the work of the CTTL through publications such as Edutopia, Mind, Brain, and Education, the ASCD Express, Impact from Chartered College, and EdSurge. Glenn has presented around the world at public, charter, private, and international school conferences, including NAIS, ASCD, ISTE, Leaning Forward, New Teacher Center, ELM, LE, Learning in the Brain, Festival of Education, and South by Southwest EDU. Glenn is the co-author of NeuroTeach, Brain Science and the Future of Education, the co-designer of NeuroTeach Global and NeuroTeach Global Student, and co-editor of Think Differently and Deeply, the international publication of CTTL. Glenn earned his MALS from Dartmouth College and a BA from Dickinson College. You are going to enjoy Glenn. Hello, Glenn. Good to see you again. 2 days in a row, Glenn.
Gene, I might be the luckiest man in the world seeing you 2 days in a row in the same week. Unbelievable.
You know, I'm going to go tell my wife you said that. I'm not quite as entertaining as home.
She'll take like an every other day situation, probably.
You know what? So would I. So would I. Well, Glenn, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is about your role at the school. Then in your introduction, we talked about that you are the director of the Center for Transformational Teaching and Learning, CTTL.
Yep.
And you are a teacher. Tell me how you blend those. What's going on there?
No, great question, Gene. I arrived at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in 1997 to teach history and be a high-level girls varsity soccer coach. And over that time, I've held department head roles, dean of study roles, and then there was this interesting moment at our school in 2007 during some strategic planning. Our generative question was, how do you take good teachers and make them great, and great teachers and make them expert? It's a really interesting question that I would still say schools and school districts should ask themselves. We were playing off sort of Jim Collins' good to great work. And it was at an interesting time. I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up in education. I love teaching. I love kids. And I love history. I think there should be 7 periods of history every day at school. No offense to anybody else who teaches anything else. But I was at a moment where my head of school said, what should we sort of go after to be big expert teachers? And we sort of got lucky. And there's a whole backstory to this, but we finally figured out that all of us collectively as a school had little knowledge of the science of how the brain and mind learns. And it was like, what if we all knew a little bit more about this? Not just the learning strategist, not the learning specialist, not the coach, not the AP Psych teacher. And it was an interesting sort of hypothesis that was driving us. If all of us knew a little bit more collectively about the science of the organ of learning, the brain, that every student will bring to every school every day, could we be more effective as educators? And I was probably at the right place at the right time. And my head of school said, let's not create a strategic plan around this. Let's just see what we can do with this. And, you sort of like talking to people and, go make friends. I mean, that literally was like the charge. I was like, cool, I'll talk to almost anybody, right? I remember the president of Dickinson College, where I went to, once said, engage everybody. And I was like, great, I can do that. But my only sort of part of this was, I said, look, I don't know where this is going to take me or the school, but I want to always make sure I'm still teaching. And we've held true to that. We started training our first cohort of faculty in 2007 in the science of teaching and learning. And I was sort of put in the position to sustain and keep the foot on the gas, so to speak. A lot of schools have the Year of the Brain initiative, right? We've all been there, or the Year of Diversity, or the Year of Technology. and then we check the box and we move on to the next thing. I really give our head, Robert Kazaski, saying, look, your job is to keep the foot on the gas. But I get to still always teach, which was great. So back then I was teaching both middle school and high school. I travel enough now with the center that I only can teach one class, but I still teach a 10th grade US and global perspective class, which I love. And they also know they're my guinea pigs. If I hear another retrieval practice strategy, they're going to get it the next day. So that's sort of how I do. I still teach, but we do have a center embedded in our preschool through 12th grade school that makes sure or supports every one of our teachers using the most promising research and strategies in their disciplines, their subjects, their age groups, and I help support them.
Great. Well, when you started this, when you all started this in 2007, you didn't have folks, traveling around the country saying retrieval practice.
No.
So where did you start? What sort of strategies, techniques did you start? What were you sharing with the faculty?
Well, it's funny. Like in 2007, the first thing we wanted to do was could we train our teachers, 100% of teachers, and back then we were 6th through 12th grade school. We are now preschool through 12, and we were like, how do we do this? Like again, we didn't really know. Back then, there were really two models out there that were intriguing enough to us. There was the All Kinds of Minds work, which was out there, and it's still around, and we actually still use it to train our teachers early on. But then there was the brain targeted teaching model with Mariel Hardiman at Johns Hopkins. And so the two ways I went around just trying to figure out what this field is or what the science of the brain, I think it was called brain based learning back then a lot. That's what I remember. So we went to Hopkins, which is not too far from us, and I think I legally stalked or legally introduced myself to Mariel Hardiman.
Yeah.
And I said, Mariel, look, this is our idea. And I was amazed. I felt like I found like a lost family member. She was like, yes, like let's try this at scale. Now our scale is a lot smaller than public schools, but we decided to train 100% of our teachers back then. Now, I also didn't know what else was out there. The Learning in the Brain conferences were the next stop. And I remember being in Boston and sitting with my colleague Ian Kelleher, and Howard Gardner's on stage. And I'm like, and he's talking about multiple intelligences you can imagine back then. And just the stuff made sense to me, but it also made sense that like, where has this stuff been in my life? Like I've been teaching since 1991. I don't think I've ever heard about metacognition or myelination or even retrieval practice. I'm not even sure if I knew the difference between active working memory and long-term memory when I first started teaching. So those elements. And then finally, really, I think the one that took us over the top, we got connected with Research Schools International at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, Dr. Kurt Fisher and his team. And really this idea of mind, brain, and education, MBE, emerged out of Hugsy. And what we were intrigued by that, we're still sort of stuck a little. We feel that MBE work takes us beyond the cognitive science, the science of learning. It looks at the mind, brain, and education together. So, that is really those three things. One, how do we train our whole faculty? And then we went to a university to get some help. We went to the Learning the Brain conference, and ultimately we ended up at Harvard's Graduate School of Education.
So I think there are distinctions to be made about going to scale sometimes when you're at a private school. And I'm going to ask, this is just a quick question. I'm not going to get into it, but do teachers at your staff, is it a union shop?
It is not,
Okay.
but I know you want a long answer. I'm not going to give you a long answer.
No. I don't want a long answer. I want
I'm
what
going to give
you.
you a quick one.
Okay.
No, I'll give you a quick one. The CTTL, by its charter, roughly 40 to 50% of its work has to be with public or public charters around the U.S. So we do, just so you know, we work with big public school districts who are unionized. There are actually not many private schools in the United States that I know of. I can name two that are unionized, but there are probably more. I just only know two.
Okay. So going back to the origin story, and you talked about a group of teachers getting together. How big a group was that, like percentage of the staff? I mean, like it's like when a charter school starts, everybody's on board. That's kind of by definition. Oh yeah, I'm for this right now. And then as people leave and, you have new folks. So what was the reception? Was everybody on board with this, or did you have some reticent folks?
Oh no way. No. Look, you know this. Like changing the teacher's mindset behavior is unbelievably hard. Love the challenge, Joe, but it's unbelievably hard.
Yeah.
We're stubborn people. We were strategic in this, right? So one is, in some ways, we were content agnostic, right? In that we were thinking about really pedagogy, right? So the teaching and learning, instructional design, instructional decisions, instructional practices. We weren't really going to get into the what you teach. And I find teachers are very defensive of the what, unless it's a scripted curriculum. And that's probably a
Yeah.
different podcast for you, right? And certainly independent school teachers have a lot of flexibility. Charter school teachers have a lot more flexibility than some of our public school friends out there. As I told you, we were 6th through 12th grade school back then. It's easier to start with middle school teachers. I'm just going to tell you. And that's what we did. We start. So the first cohort of our faculty who were trained, and the initial training was a 5-day training, were middle school teachers. And what that created was exactly what we wanted. Enough of them had friends in the upper school or the high school, and they were like, you know what, this was really good. It's led me to change my mindset about the learners in front of me. Like, we want old teachers. I would argue the most important or useful concept from neuroscience is neuroplasticity. I need all our teachers to believe that all kids can learn and want to learn. And we own some of that, and the kids own some of that. And I think it's an important mindset to have. I also felt that most of our teachers, the biggest, quickest thing we saw change was their instructional variation and differentiation, right? They knew multiple modality instruction, multiple sensory instruction is really critical. So some really looked at their curriculum and syllabi or year-long course plans and said, look, maybe I can do a little better. We then, and at some point, and this is where leadership does matter, our head of school did say, and he doesn't use a lot of political capital, I don't think. He said, look, this seems to be the right place for us to go. It's an all-in model. So now you have the head of school saying 100% of us are going to get trained. Glenn and his team that was evolving is going to support you in elevating your knowledge of the science of teaching and learning, or we call mind brain education, your efficacy, your belief in yourself as an educator to use it, and also your competence in translating it, actually using it in your classroom. And I think that's what the CTTL does really, really well. Because we start from this, we're based in a school. We're thinking always, what will the teachers use? What might move a student? And that's how we went about it. And, to this day, we're the initiative started in 2007. It is now 2025. So you could argue we've been on an 18-year initiative. There are not many schools that stick with something for 18 years. And it's just now become part of our DNA. I mean, we're having this conversation, Gene, because of our center and our work. We get invited to present around the world or present at schools because of this work. But most important, clients of us are our everyday students at St. Andrews.
Well, the reason that I wanted to go into this in a little bit more detail is that it's very easy to see, oh, Glenn Whitman, St. Andrews, and then go to St. Andrews and take a look at the school and go, well, wait a second, how does this apply to us? But you're talking about the same issues. It doesn't matter. We talk about all kids learn the same. Teachers are the same too. We still have those idiosyncrasies. Like you say, we could generalize, man, let's get the middle school teachers. So there are those things that are universal that we can generalize, regardless of the institution, regardless of kids you're teaching, socioeconomics, et cetera. There are some constants that we always have to address. And one of the two things I wanted to get a little bit more deeper. I don't know if you use the words, we knew we had to finesse it, but you may have. And if we didn't, we're going to imagine that you did use, but you had to finesse it with the folks. And I think you also alluded to the fact that were you initially like the point person to see that this was happening?
I was in a leadership position at the school. I think I was a department head for history. I then was sort of the academic dean. I oversaw sort of how do we keep our curriculum and pedagogy moving forward, right? But not necessarily through research, just like good discussions.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and most of it was like, how do we use technology? In that role as dean of studies then, and then ultimately I was anointed the director of the center. And it was really important to have a point person and have permission from the head of school. I had history at the school. I had relationships at the school. And I don't feel it's tooting my own horn. Look, I feel I really did. I'm a good teacher. I work hard at my craft every day. I think my colleagues generally know that and see that. And I think there's relational trust. But I also think the ask, we did a couple things really smart. We made the ask realistic. We presented the field of the mind brain education, and we said, what 10% of your teaching might you use to inform, validate, or transform using this work? So maybe somebody wants to give better feedback. Maybe they feel like staying up late on Sunday nights is not yielding what they want when they hand back the papers the next day or whenever, right? Maybe they want to. Maybe they want to learn more about this thing called formative assessment. It seems like everybody's talking about it, or cognitive load, or okay, belonging is an important word out there, but truly, what does that mean? And again, we gave the teachers some choice, but like a very sort of low hanging 10% felt like doable. Maybe that's a new assessment. Maybe that's changing a weekly syllabus. Maybe that's looking into some of the science of reading or literacy strategies just a bit more to making sure you're more aligned with what we know or know better. So I think those were two really key. Yes, having a point person. And then the other thing, which was the finessing, there were people who were going to just sort of wait out the initiative, right? We know this happens all the time.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
so Glenn is leading this brain thing. All right. Well, as long as he doesn't come to my room for a year, I should be fine because next year we'll be doing technology. And
Yeah.
what I did come to the room, and we just created good conversations, and I would probably even call them coaching conversations. And I didn't even know what coaching was back then. But I think there were certain things like having a point person mattered, having a common framework and language really mattered. So we actually have, and for your audience who's listening, when we work with schools, one of the first things we do is when I go to a school, I ask the principal or the head of school, can I see your professional word wall? And they look at me like, what are you asking? And I'm like, where's your professional word wall? You guys use a lot of language buzzwords around education. And nobody has one generally. We actually have a professional word wall. We have 18 words on it. And this is where we took the research around collective teacher efficacy and said, we're going to have some level of common language that we all, if I gave a formative assessment to our faculty, I would like to think I can get 80% or above. You might say it's a low bar on my little word wall formative assessment. But imagine if every school had a professional word wall. For example, on our professional word walls, executive functions. Everybody should, I would argue everyone's an executive functions teacher at every school, right? I want everybody to know what that word means, or formative assessment. We even have the amygdala on our professional word wall. It's a fun exercise. If your listeners, I hope they might consider doing it and send me a photo and prove me wrong. But I don't see many professional word walls yet at
Well,
schools, but we do.
the heck with my listeners. I just wrote that in my notes. We're going to bring that. I got to meet with the school next week. But that's what we've been talking about and talking about the next step. So just a couple more questions going back. So you were the point person, but I think you also mentioned that the head of the school also, I don't remember the title. Is it the school head?
Yeah, so
Uh,
it's at an independent school. It's often a head of school, and Robert
okay.
Kazaski's been a great 23-year head of school. Yeah.
Okay. So but if I recall right, there was a non-negotiable piece.
There was an interesting moment. I call it he used some political capital, and he sort of said, "Look, this fits our school's mission. Our school's mission starts with to know and inspire each child through exceptional teaching, learning, and service." And we argued that exceptional teaching means that teachers know a little bit more than most of them do about the science of how the brain learns. Now, maybe that's more opinionated, but I still think the research supports that. We weren't trying to like get rid of anybody. We just wanted to raise the bar for our teachers. And I think there was another, as I'm talking, there was another gentleman in our school back then, this guy John Holden. He was the assistant head of school. And because of John, I took the job at this school. And John said something I thought was really struck me. At the end of my interview, I said, "What do you want from me if you hire me?" And he says, "I want you to be better in June than you were in September." And then I said, "John, what the heck does that mean?" He says, "I trust you to know what that means." And I was like, "I want to work at that school." But that kind of culture was in the air, in the water, so to speak. But Robert did sort of say, "Look, this is the direction we're going." We shared actually some of Hattie's meta study, I imagine, around collective efficacy. And yeah, meta studies aren't perfect. I get it, and people can we can have that fight and discussion later on. But it's compelling enough to talk about. And he said, "Look, we're all going to be trained in this MBE work. Glenn's the point person, so I got his sort of anointing, and hopefully over time we're going to grow the team, and it's going to help the everyday teaching here And maybe it'll have some other benefits to the school, but more importantly, we want to be the best research informed teachers we can be. And those are really important.
I noticed yesterday, at the beginning, I said I saw you yesterday. I attended a webinar that you and Zach did, and one of the things that I hadn't seen before, and it was one of your early slides, and it was, now that you have provided some context, it was a list of words that I bet was your word wall.
It was a word wall on steroids. What we tried to present is, I know the audience. I've been jumping back between mind brain education, the science of learning. I'll just stick in the mind brain education space. The field is vast. I mean, and what I showed that slide with these two columns, it had domains like sleep and formative assessment, motivation, right? All these areas that again, knowing a little bit more about the brain and the mind, I would argue helps us to think better about what this might mean for our instructional design. Here's a great example. And I was having this conversation with Andrew Watson recently, and I love Andrew and I love Andrew's work, right? He calms me down. I get too excited. I talk to Andrew. He calms me down. So thank you, Andrew. But we've debated, Andrew debated, like, is the brain stuff more important than the mind stuff? Is the mind stuff more important than the brain stuff? And I'll just say, I started to do more retrieval practice and interleaving and spaced work when I learned about myelination. And I had no clue. I took AP Bio, I think. I clearly I didn't remember that one. But the idea of myelin and by practicing and space practice that, you're creating a level of automaticity, to me was really intriguing. But thinking about it biologically really took me to the place like, I got to start doing this. And that I'm actually a brain changer. We talk about that a lot at our school, that teachers are brain changers is sort of one of our mantras. And it's a pretty powerful feeling to have as an educator. And I wish it attracted more people to education, knowing that we are actually brain changers, for all of us in public, private, and charter schools around the world.
When you start talking about the distinction between mind and brain, it brings me back. I was a philosophy major, and every once in a while, I'll read something that Oliver writes, and I'm thinking, I just get PTSD. I mean, holy cow, it's so deep. There's these articles. And so I try to stick to what works. Mind, brain, I don't care. Does this work for you? Can we make it better? Can you be more effective? All right, let's go. One other question, because I want to ask you about some of your writing. Now that you've been doing this since 2007, and I know all the folks all the faculty who were there in 2007 are no longer there, so you need to
Right.
hire new folks. Is this part of the interview process, letting them know, look, this is who we are, but this isn't for you?
A lot of layers to the question. I want to just respond to something about the mind and the brain because I
Okay.
know look, I've sat in your audience, right? You talk about what seems to work and try it out in your context and see if it works there. What I think the mind and the brain discussion or language does is and I would say this is from the I perspective to start. It professionalizes the practice in ways that I think are important. I don't want to just throw words around and buzzwords, right? I think we teachers, we get beat up, right? Anybody can teach, right? And I hate when I hear that, right?
Yeah.
But again, I'm not saying I'm not a neurosurgeon, right, or anything like that. But I think at some level, it professionalizes the practice and makes our teachers and teachers who are thinking about it maybe walk a little taller or more confidently. I'll just say that point there.
But my question was, when you interview new folks,
Yes,
do you
yes,
tell them, hey,
that's
this
all I
is who
needed.
we are? This is who we are. You don't
Yep.
like it? There's a
No,
school down the
thanks
street.
for the Thanks for the scaffolding. So a couple of things there. No, we're pretty transparent. It works both ways. One is if you look at our website, it's clear, right? 100% research informed teachers. If you look at the hiring page, we have a whole professional growth pathways. The CTTL sort of certifies our newest teachers after they go through sort of 4 steps. So I think you've named a problem. So a school for years has been training its teachers, but it brings in new teachers. And how do those new teachers feel like they belong or know what they should be doing? Every one of our new teachers reads NeuroTeach, the book I co-authored with Ian, our head of research. At the end of their first year at our school, they go through a 3-day training. They use some of the micro courses, our NeuroTeach Global micro courses, and then they attend our summer academy. We have every July. We have a 4-day science teaching and school leadership academy where we train educators around the world in our very unique tools that organizes the research. But we have people, here's what's happening for us. We have people who show up at our door who respond to ads for positions and say, I want to be in a school. I want to be in a school that's going to ask me to look at research and maybe do some research and is actually going to help me become a facilitator and write. We have an in-house publication called Think Differently and Deeply. At the same time, we're very honest. We're a hard school to teach at. Like the bar is pretty high. You just can't show up and say, open to page 6 and let's talk about this. And we're not perfect every day. No teacher is. But there's certain elements we want in every class, right? We want some activation of prior knowledge and some sense of belonging. And as Zach and I were talking about yesterday, the right amount of direct instruction and check for understandings. And then when do kids grapple and think harder than me? And then when do I check if they're even learning? What's the formative assessment?
Yeah.
I feel early in my career, my teaching was mostly having kids work in their active working memory, and I was not doing enough of long-term memory sort of
Yeah.
encoding during my class. So I don't know if I took it in directions, but we get great teachers or people who want to teach at our school. We also are very transparent. We're going to train you, and we expect you to do this with a lot of autonomy as well, though.
Well, I want to emphasize the point one more time that the work that you do at this private school is the same work you do around the world in all schools.
When we go to when we would go to a school, this is a school district with 30,000 students. Right now, the challenge, the only difference is how you can the delivery mechanism. So at a smaller school, a charter school, our school has less than 150 teachers. We can all gather pretty easily.
Yeah.
When I go to a district that has 3,000 teachers, there's where we have to think about who. It's almost like a train the trainer model. The strategy to get every teacher in this space has to be a little different just because of just the numbers. But it's doable. Frederick County Public Schools in Maryland, it's doable. The state of Maryland, I can't believe this, they just encoded it in legislation that the science of learning has to be part of the professional development and growth plans, which I'm amazed at. So we'll see how that evolves. So it's exciting, and hopefully they become a model, and we can be part of developing that model.
Great. Man, you were good. You gave me a little introduction and the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that was your work, your book, NeuroTeach: Brain Science and the Future of Education. And you say you use that as a text for the new folks. Can you talk about the book a little bit?
Prior to podcasting or webinars or LinkedIn or Twitter, right? I enjoy writing. I think I try to convey this to my students. When you can write clearly about something, you know it. So we were doing some writing before 2016 for like Edutopia and EdCert, some small pieces, and all of a sudden, like I got a call from a publisher, and like there seems to be no book out there yet. And this is like 2015, written from a teacher perspective about maybe how to use research in the science of learning. I don't even think we were calling it back then. Would you guys be interested in writing it? And I don't know if that was a bucket list of mine, but I certainly was intrigued. So then we started to interview teachers, and what would you want your chapters to be, and whatnot like that. And then lo and behold, it led to this book called NeuroTeach: Brain Science and the Future Education. Again, I think the neuro word, right, brain, I think it reinforces this idea that the brain comes to every one of our classes every day, and it is one of the ways kids use it to learn. It's an organ of
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah.
And in 1991, when I first started teaching in Spokane, Washington, I wasn't thinking like that. My educational philosophy in 1991 was, I think I teach, they learn. Right? Open their brain. I'm going to throw some history in it.
Yeah.
Close the
Yeah.
brain. Kids go learn it. Right? But so really, Ian and I, who wrote it, and we're probably set to start the second edition. And what's been amazing since then, we're almost a decade, the proliferation of books in our field. Gene, you've written some, I've written some, there's so many great books being written out there. Kate Jones has got these great books about memory, and, Blake's new book about attention, right?
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the quality, and it's coming from both directions now too, which I like. It's coming from the researcher side, but I really start seeing school people who truly have legit school experience. They don't have to be still teaching or school leading, but they can use that experience to stand in the teacher's shoes a bit more. So we wrote the book. It is a anchor text for our faculty, a common text. And I've been amazed at how many schools have read it and are still reading it, and really appreciate that. And I think it's having an impact, which, as you know, as a writer, if people buy the book, we're not going to make money off the book, but if we're
Yeah.
impacting how people are thinking, that feels pretty good as an author.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And then was the other book, the one for students, was that just a follow-up kind of like we told the teachers how to do this and this is how to be a good student? What was the second book? I'm looking for the title here. You could probably tell me the
So,
title before I find it.
what is the second book? So
Neuro Teach Global Student.
right, so great. It's actually not a book.
Okay.
Newark Teach Club, we got a grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and EE Ford Foundations. They asked us, okay, you guys have done this stuff for teachers. What would you do differently for kids? And when we start talking to kids, maybe we should have wrote a book, but they didn't see book as the answer.
Yeah.
But one kid did say, well, God, I can't remember his name. I always say his name. I'll remember it. He came up to Ian and myself once. He goes, you gotta do me a favor. And I was like, what do you want? It was Jake. And I said, what do you want, Jake? And Jake says, you've been giving all these research and strategies directly to St. Andrews, our teachers. Not all those teachers will get them to us. Can you just get them directly to us more? And I was like, oh, that probably makes practical sense.
Yeah.
And then I said, Jake, well, how would you do it? How would you want it delivered? He sort of said, look, he was telling me about some of the learning strategy and study skills courses he's taken, both maybe with a tutor. We had a little of that at our school, and those from research have actually proven they're not really impactful. They're decontextualized, and we got a hold of Mark McDaniel, who wrote Make It Stick. I don't know if you've had
Okay.
Mark on your
Yeah.
podcast, but Mark's
Not
great.
yet. Yeah.
And Mark had an interesting model, and he said, look, I'm never going to build a platform for this, but what if we work together? And we also recruited David Daniel from James Madison University, who really was trying to think about this work. So what we did is NeuroTeach Global Student is 7 modules. Remembering what you read is one of them. Keeping it in your head. How do I maintain attention in class? Those kind of things, like really foundational learning and study strategies to elevate the agency of students. And we designed it where the kids actually do labs on themselves. They will try a strategy they think works, and then we will give them another research informed strategy in the platform to try. And then it's a comparison. Our students, our whole 9th grade does 1 module a month. And the goal is to make them more efficient, effective, and hopefully successful learners and studiers. So that was, we went more digital than a printed text for the student version.
Awesome. And as soon as I asked the question, as soon as you said book probably isn't the best thing, I'm thinking, of course it's not. I mean, of course it's not the best. Wow. This has been great. I really had enjoyed getting to know how this whole thing happened, what the center was. We've seen each other a couple times in person, and it just doesn't seem, I don't know, appropriate. I don't know. It's weird to get so serious about, discussing this stuff, in social gathering stuff. So I really appreciate you taking the time, to talk about this and clarify some of the issues. And the biggest issue, I'm going to say one more time, it doesn't matter the type of school you have. It has to do with, how do we get this content to teachers? How do we get them to employ it? And our kids learn the same way.
Yeah, no. I think look, you've been consistent through this podcast. Look, you and I saw each other in snowy Denver. We've seen each other in other places, and anytime to say hello and talk. But I think you're right. As we think about, look, it's a tough time. Education's tough, right? I mean, it's a tough job. We're dealing with complex students who are really developing in front of our eyes. I think though, the body of research, whether you want to call it mind brain education science or the science of learning or educational neuroscience, I believe it's still underutilized. And I still think it can be a really important solution and lens to some of the challenges and problems schools are facing. And I would even say, this is a bold statement, I think it could also help us attract, retain, and develop the next generation of great teachers. I think we just got to market teaching as a research innovation, we're brain changers profession. So we'll see what happens. And
Yeah.
but maybe we'll do a part 2 in a couple of years.
Could be. So you have any questions for me?
Well, it's funny. I wrote down some questions last night for you. I don't even remember what I wrote, but I thought they were really good questions, and I didn't even use AI. I think the one question I have for you, you've been at this a little longer than me, right? You've been in education
Yeah.
a little bit longer. And so my question to you is, you know, how are you truly like where are you really hanging your hat that I used to think this when I started my education career, but now I really, really think this. Because I think it's okay for us to are thinking to evolve, and I think sometimes teachers are afraid of that.
Okay, well, this is beyond all the things that I've learned.
Okay,
Okay. Okay, beyond all the science of learning things and all of that. But I think what's changed, and I think you'll understand this as a soccer coach, which meant that you were a soccer player,
I
that
was.
explicit instruction, how else do you do this? So I never wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a coach. I was a good teacher. I was a good assistant coach because I could teach the skills of the different positions. But you know where I wasn't good in the classroom because I didn't understand how these transferred, into instruction. So what really changed for me was being able to understand how this for any content area we can make this, these components of explicit instruction, we can bring them into the classroom. In fact, that was one of the big reasons I wanted to write my book, Teach Fast, is because, we would do these trainings, we teach teachers in explicit instruction, and they'd say, well, I see how it works for math, but I don't see how it works for anything else. And they say, okay, we'll stick around and we'll show you. So I think that was the one of the biggest thing that changed, that like you talked about before, it's content agnostic.
No, and I love how you said that. And you know, as we were doing this podcast yesterday with Zach, I've gotten some emails since then, and people are, you know, it was about direct instruction and explicit instruction. And what people think is like that's all you're going to end up doing, and it's going to
Yeah.
be boring, and kids. And it's no, it's the pathway to do the higher order thinking and the creativity because kids now have the knowledge strongly encoded to use as they explore their passions and curiosity. So I think you're right. I think to be honest, and I said this recently, like I'm becoming better at that work, but it's only been recent, right? I think I was a good lecturer with some moments of check for understanding,
Yeah.
but my gaps were too big. I think my gaps my check for understandings were too spread apart. So I agree with that. What about? I don't know if you're going to kick me off yet, no, but I'm both hopeful and worried about the future of the profession in that attracting the talent, right? There's not going to be, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of non teachers out there thinking about this as a career, but how would you think we could attract? Because I think your work helps to retain and develop teachers, like
Yeah.
the coaching work and the like. But how do we get them into into this awesome career and craft? Is there any traction?
My opinion. And I
Oh,
think
good.
it goes back to one of the things you said earlier about, we need to professionalize it so that somebody's proud to say, I'm going to be a teacher. This is becoming cliche now, and no cliches on this show, but the idea of that we're asking people to be superheroes.
Yeah.
No, it's a job. And I think the other thing that I think people need to know going in is that you don't have to be a lifer. I mean, in other
Yeah.
industries, I haven't read research recently, but around the turn of the century, they'd say, you change what you do or how you do it every 5 to 7 years.
Right.
And I think it's even more frequent. But criminy, I think we could change the salary schedule so that we could attract people, and we could also say, you know what, Glenn, I don't know if this is working for you. You don't seem happy. You know,
Right.
get out. You could do a lot of stuff because I just don't think we make the job again. When you say you have to be a hero, that means you have made the system so difficult for these folks.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting. I read something recently that during down economic times, an interest in teaching goes up. So I'll be curious. So, you know, we're in an interesting economic time in the U.S. and
Yeah.
the world. You know, and again, for maybe the right reasons, maybe people are just looking for any job, which is definitely don't do that in teaching. But you know, I think there's an interesting opportunity here to maybe make this an attractive thing. And then obviously my only other thought is, as you talk about the hero-esque nature of our job sometimes, the complexity, I'm obviously intrigued with, I'm not afraid of AI. Like, I think right now I'm seeing teachers use it more to go to bed earlier and maybe become more efficient. I'm not too sure on the learning side yet, but do you have any quick, are you seeing AI in your world or your lens in
You know,
any new ways?
I've been around long enough to see so many cottage industries pop up,
Right,
and I think there are more presentations and conferences about AI, which is obsolete a week later. So I still believe that my work was always, let's talk about explicit instruction, let's talk about lesson design, and now let's talk about how to deliver it effectively. And now if a teacher came in to me with an AI created lesson, I would still do the same analysis of the lesson. I don't know what the cliche is now, you're the boss, the AI is the slave, you're the boss. And so I think that can needs to continue to happen. But I can just see, when I would work with language arts teachers, one of the tenets of explicit instruction is that you have practice
right,
right away. And so one of like if we were going to do something with revise and edit text, revise and edit writing, well, it would take the teacher hours and hours and hours to find samples where now it's 20 seconds. Give me 5 samples with these errors. And, so there's so much there, but I
right.
just don't want to give it up. I just think that there is so much to the profession that I don't want anybody to ever say, I can give this up to X.
Right. No, no, and and it's the relational intelligence. Forget AI, RI. I think I keep seeing out there is really a starting point. Whether you're coaching a teacher or a teacher's working with a student. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to tell teachers they have to be heroes, but the residue, the result is you have people come up to you, you have kids will come up to you 10, 20 years later and say, you were my hero. But you didn't have to be heroic. You could just
Yeah,
be good at your job.
I have brothers who do very different things. They're more in the business world. There has not been a day, I don't think, very rarely do am I not excited to go to school and engage with
Yeah.
kids. I'm 56 years old. I feel young. They make me laugh. Sometimes I have no clue what they're saying. But you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You'll get that letter from the alumni or a student who somehow is reconnects and just says thank you. And you know what? I don't think my brothers who are doing very well in industry get much of that. I always like the book Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor
Uh,
Frankl's book, and
yeah.
I read that every year around the Jewish holidays, and I feel really lucky. I feel really lucky to have chosen teaching, and more importantly, though, I do feel like I've been lucky to be at a school that decided, hey, we can be better teachers by looking at some of these research things that I had no clue about early in my career. So, a little fortuna is okay.
Yeah. Glenn, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure. It's always a joy talking to you. Always have fun, always laugh.
Look, you and I agree. Start with joy and laughter, and then we can dig into the heady stuff. Gene, love your work. Thanks for doing it, and I love the friendship.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. We'll talk to you soon. If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused, Adaptable, Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.